Welcome back to the deep dive. This is where we take your source material, your articles, your data, your research, and we really try to filter it all down into those essential nuggets of knowledge. Today, we're doing a deep dive into the state of Florida. But we're not here to talk about, the usual tourist traps or the sensational headlines you always see. We are here to establish the fundamental identity of the state, the core factual blueprints that define its existence on the map, its civic structure, and, well, its place in American history. We have a set of sources that give us some very clear geographic, civic, and historical coordinates. Our mission is to extract those coordinates and understand what they really mean. Okay, let's unpack this.
And right away, when we look at the raw data, we're anchored in a very specific place. Geographically, our sources confirm Florida's placement squarely in the southeastern United States. That's the broad region, defined by a distinct climate, a shared historical context.
That broad region is a good starting point, but the sources give us something even more specific and, frankly, more interesting. The immediate neighbors. I mean, if you're trying to understand regional connectivity, trade, infrastructure, all of that, you need to know exactly who it touches.
Precisely. And this is key. Unlike some states that have, half a dozen neighbors, Florida's land boundaries are surprisingly limited. It shares its entire northern border with only two states, Georgia and Alabama.
Just two. That's a crucial geographical constraint right there.
Yeah.
Just Georgia and Alabama. It immediately tells you something about its isolation. Most of its external engagement has to happen by air or sea because it's not constantly negotiating with a bunch of different states to its north and west.
It's almost a closed-loop system, right up until you hit those two lines. It creates a regional dynamic that's structurally dependent on what happens in that narrow northern band, if you compare it to a state like Tennessee or Missouri.
Which borders so many others.
Exactly. Florida's economic and political concerns are heavily tilted toward the policies and shared interests of just those two neighbors. That limited boundary is really the foundation for its land-based identity.
So we have the anchor, southeastern U.S., bordered by Georgia and Alabama. Now let's move to the thing everyone pictures when they hear the name Florida. I mean, its physical shape, it just dominates that corner of the continent, jutting out so dramatically. What's the single defining physical characteristic that sets it apart?
The defining geographical takeaway, and this is absolutely essential, is that most of Florida's territory is a peninsula. We really can't overstate this. It's not just a state with a coastline. It is a landmass that is largely surrounded by water. This physical reality dictates, well, everything. Its weather, its history, its reliance on maritime commerce.
I agree. Peninsula is the key word. But let's not just define the shapes, let's define the water. You said it dictates everything, and that's because we're talking about massive bodies of water defining those boundaries.
And the sources are crystal clear on the scale of this. This huge peninsula is fundamentally bordered by two colossal maritime systems. To the west and south, you've got the warm, shallower waters of the Gulf of Mexico, and then along its long eastern flank, you have the deeper, more powerful currents of the Atlantic Ocean.
And this is where the analysis gets really interesting. It's not just water. It's two different kinds of water systems. Why is that specific split, Gulf versus Atlantic, such a critical piece of information?
Well, the distinction is profound, especially when you consider climate and resources.
Yeah.
The Gulf of Mexico tends to be, shallower, warmer, and more biologically productive in certain ways.
Mm-hmm.
It heavily influences the state's massive fishing industry and the petrochemical infrastructure up in the Panhandle.
Okay, so that's the Gulf side.
Right. Conversely, the Atlantic side is influenced by the Gulf Stream. That's a major ocean current moving huge volumes of warm water northward very rapidly. And that has historically made the Atlantic coast crucial for global trade routes, and it has a more immediate, severe impact on hurricane tracking.
That's the crucial context. So policymakers are dealing with two separate, large-scale environmental and economic systems at the same time. One driven by the Gulf and its unique pressures, the other by the Atlantic.
Exactly. It's truly a land bridge that's mediating between two very different external environments.
Okay, let's take that physical foundation and shift our focus inward to where the power and the people actually reside. And here we find that common but crucial dynamic of a split center of gravity.
Exactly. This is where we start to understand the internal structure of the state. You have the official seat of government, the city that holds the reins of power, where all the legislative work happens. That city is the official capital, Tallahassee.
And Tallahassee is located way up in the Panhandle. Geographically, it's so distant from the bulk of the population centers further south, that distance is key. But let's contrast that political nerve center with where the people actually are.
According to the sources, the largest city in Florida by population is Jacksonville, and this immediately creates the potential for a really crucial internal tension. You have the political engine room, Tallahassee, and the most populous city, Jacksonville, and they are geographically separated by almost the entire length of the upper part of the state.
That separation has to force a distinct style of governance. Policy made in Tallahassee has to be designed to accommodate the needs of, say, rural North Florida,
Yeah.
but also the urban centers like Jacksonville in the Northeast and the huge populations clustered way down south.
And it manifests constantly in legislative debates, especially around infrastructure and resource allocation. Tallahassee has to balance the priorities of its own region with the intense, localized needs of a massive hub like Jacksonville.
I can imagine.
I mean, state officials frequently have to fly or drive the full length of that peninsula just to interact with their own constituents. The distance often translates into differing regional interests. Rural versus metro, panhandle versus coast. It's a real logistical challenge.
And speaking of those massive population hubs, we have a very specific snapshot of the total population. We often use round numbers, but the specificity in our sources, it makes this feel like an official document, a capture from a single moment in time.
That precision is invaluable. It grounds the conversation in a measurable reality, moving us past generic descriptions of just a crowded state.
And the specific figure our deep dive is based on is 15,982,378 people. That degree of specificity tells you this data point was pulled directly from a key census or a major governmental assessment.
And when you think about the implications of a number that large, you're quantifying massive challenges.
Yeah.
Housing, transportation, environmental management for that specific number of citizens.
That's not just a statistic.
Not at all. It represents the scale of the state's civic management at that specific point in time.
Yeah.
It defines the scope of their budget, their representation in Congress, their whole administrative complexity.
Okay, so we've established the geography, the water, the borders. We've established the civic structure, the distant capital, the populous center. Now let's give this identity a historical anchor. Where does Florida fit into the story of the United States as a whole?
This is a specific historical nugget that really positions Florida within the timeline of American expansion. It wasn't one of the original 13.
Not at all. Nor was it part of the immediate post-revolution additions.
Right.
Florida was the 27th state to join the U.S. This number, this position, tells a very specific story about its timeline.
The number 27 is critically important. It puts Florida's statehood in 1845. That's firmly within the mid-19th century context of American expansion.
Right before the Mexican-American War.
Exactly, and during the escalating tensions leading up to the Civil War. It's right in that defining middle tier of states admitted as the country wrestled with deep questions about slavery, federal power, and manifest destiny.
And the significance of being the 27th state is that its identity, its laws, its political structure, they were all forged under Spanish or territorial rule for a much longer period than the early states.
That's a great point. It gives it a unique historical character that's very different from its neighbor Georgia, which was a founding colony. That historical trajectory means that when Florida joined the Union, it was already dealing with established populations and land use patterns, a political culture that had developed largely outside the framework of the original English colonies.
So it came into the Union as an established yet still developing entity.
And that positions it historically as a really essential part of that early national expansion rather than some kind of slow afterthought.
So this deep dive has effectively extracted 4 pillars of Florida's fundamental identity, straight from the source material. It's time to bring all these seemingly separate facts into focus for you. First, its location is fixed, southeastern U.S., bordering only Georgia and Alabama. Second, its defining geography is primarily a peninsula, creating this massive boundary between 2 different maritime systems, the Gulf and the Atlantic.
Then the third, that civic split. The distant political capital, Tallahassee, and the most populous city, Jacksonville, all containing a specific population of 15,982,378 people.
And finally, the historical anchor. Florida was the 27th state to join the U.S. in 1845. So what does this all mean when we put the pieces together?
It means we're looking at a state whose physical identity is defined by water and isolation. Its political structure is inherently challenged by geographic distance and the sheer scale of its population. And its historical entry into the Union places it right at the flashpoint of 19th century expansion.
Which leaves a pretty big question.
It does. It raises an important question for you to consider. Given that Florida's identity is so defined by its water boundaries and its government in Tallahassee is so far removed from its population hub in Jacksonville, how does the physical reality of its geography and its historical status as the 27th state fundamentally shape its future economic destiny versus its current political will? That interplay of physical isolation, administrative challenge, and its mid 19th century roots really defines the state's unique trajectory.